going back to the comment that Washougal has budgeted in the reserves for capital expenditures. I've managed budgets well in excess of the general fund in Washougal and managed multi-million-dollar budgets for many, many years, decades. And I have never seen anybody budget in that, even consider that a budget concept. And I've worked at the federal, state, and local level, and I've never seen that. I was privy to some of the budget discussions here beginning in 2007, and I didn't hear any of that. And
Did you know Becky at all?
Frankly, I think it's a dumb concept.
Did you know Becky at all?
Yes.
Molly?
Frankly, at least I think I hear a little bit of what both of you are saying. And so we're looking right now short-term at the 2011 budget. But I think if we really, knowing what costs are in the long term, if we look at it in the long-term picture, we are looking at a method of financing city government that is not doable in the future. And so we really are gonna have to look at a different way, whether it's level of service, whether it's smaller government, whether it's increased forest revenue. I don't know what it would be, but we really need to start looking long-term. If we thought that it was gonna be a deficit for 1 year, 2 years, and we had some substantive evidence short-term, I would feel very comfortable with seeing these increased, with the deficits increasing every year. But we're already at bare bone, I think. I think what our expenditures have been, we've reduced expenditures, we've cut costs down to the bone. And I really am not sure where else we go that's gonna be very savory from here on out.
It would be difficult. It certainly, my goal will never change, is to bring you a completely balanced budget. When you look at the fact that the adopted 2010 budget, we're back to you with actuals of projected actuals of 2010 that are $1.2 million under what were budgeted. When you look at the 2011 proposed deficit of 185 versus 937 where it was, that also helps us improve the 2012, 2013. If you go back to the proposed deficits that Paul gave you in July, you'll see that they're shockingly higher by some of those same amounts. We're going to continue to find different ways to do things within the city. There's no doubt. That's, I've mentioned to a number of the department heads, however we've done business in the past, we need to set that aside and start looking at any other reasonable alternative in order to bring in services where we are and spend less money to do it. I almost hate to say that at some point, I believe that when we're running reserves where we are, there's some reasonable amount of reserves that we can use in order to balance the budget for the year if we don't find additional savings over the next 12, 13, 14 months from the time that we adopt wherever this budget ends up. That I think hopefully at least the past practice in the last 12 months has shown that even though you as council members, and it is certainly completely in your prerogative to appropriate whatever dollars you're going to appropriate, even though they were appropriated at a certain level, I think at a staff level, we've tried to prove ourselves pretty darn well that we're not going to accept that and we're going to come in under that, and the staff continues to do that. Even today, we were making some other adjustments, even knowing that we're coming into this meeting. It's a never-ending process, and it will be for many, many years. I'm not here to blow smoke, though. I can't tell you that the $270,000 in 2012 is going to be zero. I'm not here to tell you that the $231,000 or $381,000 in 2013 is only going to be $50,000, because we don't know what it's going to be. I know at this point, today, we've identified enough savings and enough changes in how we're doing business and some proposed changes in levels of service of what we're looking at in 2011 to get it down to 185. If the directive from council is to get that to 0, we can certainly do that. It is going to have a very large impact to somewhere in the system or somewheres in the system. Rod?
I want to back up some of the statements that Paul made, and that is true that even as far back as when we addressed, had an inquiry about opening up the card rooms, we went to La Center and they talked about their gambling out there and the fact that when they get those payments in, they get it and they would build a street or they would build a new fire station or something like that, one-time expenditure. And so for the last 10 years, that's been a very serious subject here. We didn't overload our numbers of personnel. Whether it's a good budget process or not, it is one we've worked with, and that is to use those dollars that both Public Works and Planning have identified as one-time revenue sources that came in.
No problem with that, it's
Right.
the capital expenditures on the
But we still we tried to spend those dollars rather than load up on employees. We tried to spend those on capital projects and things that were a one-time expenditure based on a one-time revenue. And I think that's where Paul was getting at. The other thing that I've watched over the years is that before Becky, we had, our projections would be, and they, notoriously, they came in better than the low estimate of projections of revenues and taxes and those types of things. So, not to say it would work that way this coming year, but notoriously, finance directors have always given us the worst-case scenario rather than, we're gonna have 500,000 next year when we didn't have it. It was always the other end of the scale, and it came in generally better with the revenue source than not. I like the ER&R fund, and I like that, but that 185, when we look at that is, Paul's right, we did say that. When we had those revenues coming in, those one-time revenues, there was assumptions made that we would put that money away and have it in these rough times.
To cover anything but capital expenditures.
Yeah, because in any economy, you have spikes
And I agree with that. It's the capital expenditure part I want to do. That you have to plan to set the money aside year by year.
Agreed.
Otherwise, you're faced with what we're faced with now, which is taking $600,000 out of insurance.
Well, and I don't want to have to spend 185,000 either, but on the other hand, I'd sure have a much more terrible taste in my mouth if it was a $900,000 deficit that we were looking at, like where we started. And no one's going to deny that. We all feel the same way, I'm sure. But I know that Sean and David have made every effort this year to maintain our staffing at current levels, not lay anybody off.
We've done great work.
And
we're cutting costs.
right, and the department heads need to all be patted on the back for an exemplary job of cutting costs. But I'm like Paul, I've watched it in my private practice where I worked at for the years, I've watched it here. And when it comes time to, when you've lost institutional knowledge and when you have to lay somebody off and retrain those people, and generally once they're gone,